Let's start with William calling in from California. William, you're live on Truth Wanted. What's up?
Hey, how you doing?
Doing good, doing good.
William?
Just enjoying the night. What's
Very
up?
Good. I'm an atheist, as a matter of fact.
Okay.
Or at least I just don't. I have no belief in God. But I'll find myself in a conversation with someone, and if it tends towards their belief in God, and when I start to retort, I find myself being a bit arrogant. And I'm just wondering, how do I moderate that so, I don't come off like an asshole?
That's such a great question.
It's going to feel weird to answer this because I feel like in trying to answer this with any amount of authority, either one of us can come off as arrogant too.
Yeah, that's true.
Well,
here's what I think of this, right? So I consider my non-belief a result of my privilege. Okay, so the way that I construct that is I grew up in a certain culture. I grew up in a certain environment that caused me to have the beliefs that I did when I was younger, right? That being Christianity, and like everything that came with it, right? And so when I became, when I got access to college and I the internet helped out with a bunch of stuff, that started a real impetus in my change. Now, a lot of people, they didn't have to do that, right? That wasn't their method, but that's a method for a lot of people. They kind of get more exposure to the world and they kind of question their own ideas, and then they realize, oh, that's not the same. So like that's just not going to be everybody's process. But like I have to internalize that narrative when I am relating to other people, because I have to remember that I was once in a place where I thought I knew everything too, and I thought that I just had the truth and that it was my job to share it. And I just have to humble myself and put myself in that place. It's easy for me to do in particular because I can go watch a video of myself, of me as a Christian, talking to Anthony Magnabosco whenever I want. That's up there. Most people don't have that. But like I look at that guy and I look at that 19-year-old and I think, yeah, that was me, and of course I said stuff I would never agree to today. But hey, like people do change and people can really open themselves up to new ideas if you really give them that chance. Now, Anthony, he didn't change my mind in that single experience. In fact, I would say it wasn't one single person that did. It was a cultivation of a life of experiences and a life of conversations. So you have to remember that too, that you are not going to be the single impetus, most likely, that's going to change somebody's mind on anything. So,
right.
Don't let that sway your conversations, right? Don't let that be the thing saying, well, I have to show this guy everything why they're wrong, because people just aren't ready for that, especially if they're already resistant to those ideas. It's going to be really hard for you to change anybody's mind if you really come at it with, well, this is why you're wrong because X, Y, and Z, and I know better,
Right. I find that I come across people, and when I start to expose my belief or my understanding of this world and the world that we live in, is that I take their bubble, I break it a little bit, and the thing that puts them to sleep at night, the thing that they feel good about, that the world is going to be in one piece tomorrow, kind of gets a little bit sawed off at the edges a little bit. Because of what I'm espousing, and I find myself, when they retort with some of these, the usual Christian or even Muslim or, whatever religion it is, I find myself getting angry because I think it's foolish. I think I myself in my youth spent enough time doing this and coming around to the conclusion after doing some real soul searching, after looking at it very finely and finally deciding that, no, that's not for me, or that's not true. I don't believe it. I don't.
When I was a child, I spoke as a child, right?
So you had you see a lot of, it seems like you see a lot of yourself in people you have those conversations with. And so some of that, this is almost like armchair therapist. So I don't want to come off that way, but would it be accurate to say that in seeing those aspects of yourself in them and seeing the stage of whatever journey that person's on in them, some of the frustrations you have with those people are frustrations with an older version of you?
probably a younger version of me.
Or yeah, a younger version of you. I don't know why I said older.
You're even more Christian in the future. That's how it happens.
To tell you the truth, I really can't get too much older.
So I think one of the things that helps me a little bit, and it might help you as well, and this is just a way that I approach a lot of conversations, not just the atheistic ones. And those who followed my channel I've been on this for 4 years. Oh God, what have I done with my life? Anyway,
cool shit, Suris.
Cool shit. One of the things that really changed the way that I approach a lot of conversations is I go into it with almost a goal-oriented mindset. So when somebody's having a conversation with you and the topic of their theism comes up, what is your goal? What are you attempting to accomplish in there? Because if the goal is to educate them, then they need to already be receptive to that education to begin with, else that goal ends in failure. If your goal, let's say that they're a Christian who's saying that you're going to burn, in hell for whatever reason. I know my comment section's filled with quite a lot of that. Then the goal might be defense. And at that point, maybe a little bit of the arrogance is warranted, because this is a moment where somebody's basically encroached upon you and your well-being. But it's not always the case. So I guess the best advice that I would have is just go in with a clear goal into any of those conversations. If you don't have one when you start the conversation, then a lot of those frustrations can come up, because when you don't have a goal in mind in those conversations, sometimes you get this feeling, and maybe you'll empathize with this. You get that feeling of like, you just aren't getting it. Why aren't you understanding this thing I'm explaining to you? And a lot of that comes down to not necessarily approaching all conversations with the end goal of that conversation in mind. And I don't know if that's helpful for you, but I know that was helpful for me.
Well, I find myself most of the time just staying quiet. I don't want to get into it. Religion is not a topic, just like politics, that you don't really want to discuss over the dinner table. And most of the time I stay quiet unless I am really provoked. And then I find myself coming off and just, I retort. I say, I give them what I have, and I ask them for proof. I ask them for anything that's real, that we can look at, that's really something we can both understand. And that's when we have arguments.
Yeah. And a lot of that comes down to what is, I'll throw this in like almost a way to describe a game. Because this makes it like this divorces the entire conversation from religion, so that no matter what side of conversation somebody comes down to, it makes sense. So when it comes to evidence that someone will accept that something is X, let's say evidence that a video game is bad, we all have different criteria for what we accept makes a game good. For some people, a game can control horribly, but it has a great story. So they could be invested in like the worst programmed piece of spaghetti code of all time, but it's got a great story behind it, so it's good for them. And then there are other people that they really couldn't care for the story so long as it's coded well. And when they play it, the designers factored in that, okay, they're going to press buttons in a certain way and characters are going to move in a certain way, and it's going to feel good to play the game. Because there are people that accept these different forms of evidence, these different perspectives, sometimes it's hard, because you mentioned, like, can you bring something that we can both agree on? Not everybody's going to be able to do that. And I think you already know that from experience. Yeah. Not everybody has the same criterion for what makes good evidence. So again, I think it comes back to the goal thing. One way you can approach that is when somebody gives you evidence that feels, bad, and you feel yourself getting those frustrations, instead, kind of move the conversation to, is there some other scenario where you would accept this evidence as, logically consistent? If like with the last caller, I have a dream. That dream says that I was diagnosed with X, Y, and Z. Therefore, I share a consciousness with God. Is there any other circumstance in which we would accept a dream as evidence? Should we accept dreams as evidence in a court of law when we're dealing with, a case of homicide? Should we accept dreams as evidence? And you kind of get where I'm getting at. There are people who just haven't had that. There are people who haven't actually sat down and thought about the things that lead them to the beliefs that they do. They haven't thought about what criteria makes good evidence yet. And sometimes just saying, hey, have you thought about any other scenarios in which you would accept this as fair or true? And if it feels like they're pulling a reason out of their butt, if it feels like they're getting defensive, just go, hey, maybe we should move the conversation to something else. I just wanted to give you that food for thought, and then move on out of that. Because if you feel yourself getting frustrated and your goal is to educate someone, the more frustrated you are, the less effective you're going to be in accomplishing that goal.
Yeah. It does make it worse. Like
go
ahead.
You're right. When they start to pull out the Bible and they start pointing at verses, I kind of glaze over, and I'm really not too interested in this book. Whatever you've got an idea about it, but and you're right. It's many a times that I have done exactly that. I said, let's change the subject. Let's move on. We're done here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I have to be careful with this too. Like even on Twitter, sometimes if I'm not having a good day, I don't start a fight with somebody, but somebody might comment something stupid.
You woke up and chose violence.
Yeah. And then, then you have to have a back and forth there. Right. And it's just like, okay, no. And then I end up deleting a conversation or something, because I know at the end of the day, that conversation is probably not going to help people. Right. My MO at the end of the day is, am I helping people? Am I even helping myself in these conversations? Am I going to learn something new from this? Am I even going to be open and receptive? Because otherwise I'm not giving that person the same thing that I would want them to give me. Right. Just like Suris was saying, there is a motivation involved. There's a goal involved that you really have to think about. It's difficult. It's hard. I think it's a skill that we all have to learn. Another thing I want to point out though is the systems of thinking that I value now were not things that I valued when I was younger. So there was a lot of emotional appeals and other kinds of rhetorical appeals that would have convinced me, because I had different sense of values than I do now. Not everybody is going to value the arguments that I find to be convincing in the same way that I do. So you also have to work with your audience a little bit and realize I have to construct this in a way that's going to be palatable to them, or just realize that, hey, maybe there's other ways we can, really think about this topic altogether, or approaches to this topic, because, you talk to the average person on the street, they don't know what modus ponens means, or they're not going to care about what Socrates had to say. It's like, you got to meet people.
Post hoc ergo proctor hoc. They're going to be like, post lunch, what?
Yeah, exactly. And that's not, again, that's a result of my privilege for sure, to be able to have that kind of education. But also it's an internal thing. I can't give somebody the values. I wish I could make somebody value the same things I value. I guess I can always make arguments as to why they should value something, but that's always going to be dependent on a different value for sure. So it's kind of this never ending thing, but yeah, it's, you have to consider that too, when doing this.
Yeah. All right. I get you.
Yeah, for sure. I hope that was helpful, William. I think, as you alluded to, you're probably older than me and Suris, so you probably have some more life experience as far as conversations go. But I appreciate you asking us for some advice there. That's very kind of you.
I've been watching this on the tube for quite some time, so I decided that I need to bring out that question, at least for myself, or maybe your audience, to try to understand and try to have a little bit more maybe compassion for that other person. And that's what I look at,
I appreciate you calling in, William. This was a good conversation, and I'm glad that we talked about this, because this is definitely something that reaches close to my heart. At the end of the day, I'm doing this because I want to help people, whether that's a self-serving thing or not. I feel like this is an effective medium for me, and I hope people watching at home too, when you guys have conversations, you want to help people too, and also help yourself, being open again to what other people have to say, in learning about what people think through that experience. So anyway, thanks again for calling in, William. Appreciate the call. It was really insightful. And I hope you have a great rest of your night.